we can start the meeting. I'd like to start the meeting by opening with a moment for quiet reflection and silence, please. Thank you very much. Can I just check? We have a new, we have a different, procedural officer, Mr. Giannis Kutsia, who is standing in for Ms. Kamish Ahmed. Mr. Kutsia, is there a quorum for this meeting?
Afternoon, Chairperson. Yes, I'll be standing in for her. We have got a quorum. We have got 3 members, and we may proceed with the meeting, Chair.
Thank you very much. The apologies that we've received is from the Premier, Premier Windy, and from the Director General, Dr. Harry Malila. I understand that Mr. Hilton Arendse will be the acting DDG for this meeting and will be presenting on their behalf. For the record, I'd like the members to introduce themselves so that we have it for the record. Can we have starting with Member Dugmore? Okay, then Member Bartman.
Afternoon, Deirdre Bartman, member of the committee.
Thank you. Member Pretorius.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Gerrit Pretorius, member of the committee. Thank you, Chair.
And then I see Member Dugmore. Member Dugmore, can you hear us? If not, then we'll move on. Mr. Arendse, if you can introduce yourself, please, sir.
Thanks, Chairperson. Good afternoon, Chair and colleagues and members. Chair, once again, apologies for Premier and DG not being able to be here, and he asked me to lead this team. So I have with me a few of our team members. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself, Chair. Hildegard will be doing the presentation, and thereafter we'll be taking questions. So Hildegard, can I ask you to introduce yourself, and then I'll take the rest of the team.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, honourable members. My name is Hildegard Voss, and I am responsible for policy and strategy in the Department of the Premier. And then I'd like, if I may, or also on behalf of the acting DG, go through the other members of my team. I'm just going to ask Alison Goldstuck to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alison Goldstuck, and I am the Director of Economic Policy, and I joined the department in May. So I'm relatively new.
Lovely. And then on to Diketso.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Diketso. I am a Deputy Director in the Policy and Strategy Unit working in the Wellbeing space. Thank you.
Great. Gwen?
Good afternoon, honourable members. My name is Gwen Derrymaker, and I also work in the Policy and Strategy Unit, Department of the Premier, in the safety space.
Thanks. Sarah?
Good afternoon, honourable members and colleagues. My name is Sarah Sally, also working the policy unit under Hildegard. Thanks so much.
And lastly, Tristan.
Good afternoon, Tristan Gergens, also in the policy and strategy unit under Hildegard.
Right, that's the team. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Hildegard. Chairperson, that's our team. And I'll hand over to you. As I said, Hildegard will lead the presentation.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure that we all understand the rules of engagement for these meetings. So I'll go through it one more time. All members to be muted at the beginning of the meeting to avoid background noises. Members, if you could flag points of order in the chat function of MS Teams. All videos and audio must be switched off to improve the quality of the connection. If an official is speaking, they will put on their mic and video. Participants must switch off their mics once they have finished speaking. What I will do now is put on my video just to show everybody that I am here and I'm present. I just want to make sure, Member Dagmore, can you hear us?
Good morning, good afternoon, Chair, and everyone in the meeting. I can hear you clearly. Fortunately, IT assisted me in the week to sort out my connectivity issues with Teams. So far, so good. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you very clearly, sir. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the department for the briefing on policy priorities of the Western Cape and alignment to the provincial strategic plan and the implementation plan. Mr. Arnson, Ms. Foss, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Chairperson. My colleague Sarah is bringing up the presentation, which I assume that all of you can view. I just want to reflect on the brief that we were given and what we are asked to present on. We are asked to present on what is listed in that title, which is the Western Cape Government Policy Priorities and the alignment to the Provincial Strategic Plan and the Provincial Strategic Implementation Plan. So we will be showing you all the various initiatives and how they align to the broader Provincial Strategic Plan. I will be presenting the first few slides. I'll also be presenting the job slides, and my colleagues Tristan and Gwen will be presenting the safety and well-being slides, and then I will wrap up at the end. Chairperson, we're going to be going at quite a clip through these slides, and if you can guide us if you wish us to answer any questions as we go along. But we will seek to be brief because we do understand you have other items on your agenda today. So,
sorry, Ms. Foss, if I may, we normally take questions at the end, but the members are welcome to raise their hands in the chat function and the people function in MS Teams if indeed you are going too fast. But I'd suggest that you be as practical as thorough as possible. Member Dagmore?
Thank you, Chair. I think as Foss has indicated, there is quite a crowded agenda. So, I would urge through you, Chair, to follow your recommendation that we listen to the presentation and then just deal with questions afterwards, because otherwise I think we're going to battle to finish our agenda on time. That would be my proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Dagmore. Yes, let's take questions at the end. Ms. Foss, you may go.
Great, thanks. So if we can move on to the next slide. I'm going to provide you with an overview of how the priorities work, because we were interrupted by COVID, and so as a result, as we went along, we did some rejigging with respect to the priorities. Next slide. Right, so you will be familiar with the Provincial Strategic Plan that went up to 2019, and those were called Provincial Strategic Goals, or PSGs. We then did an end-of-term review, and that resulted in the Provincial Strategic Plan for 2019-24. This is the same in other provinces and also at a national level, and we called them VIPs, which was Vision-Inspired Priorities, and we had 5. Safe and cohesive communities, growth and jobs, empowering people, mobility and spatial transformation, and innovation and culture. Innovation and culture, the 5th one, is more of an enabler than a priority on its own. So it basically supports priorities 1 to 4. Then COVID-19 hit, and we had a lot of discussions about what the implications would be. And we had discussions about the Provincial Strategic Plan. Does it change the plan? And we came to the conclusion that what it did was that it actually just elevated certain priorities in the PSP. It did not replace it. So the Provincial Strategic Plan is still our guiding document. The Recovery Plan really elevating certain issues. And we then reformulated the priorities to be 3: jobs, safety, well-being, and then again, the enabler, except now we call it innovation culture and the all-important governance included. Again, supporting the above 3 priorities. It doesn't mean to say that we dropped a whole bunch of programs, more that we really elevated it and put it into those 3 buckets. Next slide. And this then shows you how we went along. We had the Western Cape Safety Plan, which was in fact developed before the Provincial Strategic Plan. That was one of the informants of the Provincial Strategic Plan. We had the Recovery Plan of 2020, the Provincial Strategic Implementation Plan of 2021, which was basically just a list of the various initiatives that we track. And then there has been a rethinking recently about the jobs priority and how to make it more impactful. And that has resulted in a new strategy called the Growth for Jobs Strategy. That was 2023. And that takes us through to today. And it'll take us into next year. And those are the main documents that really inform much of this presentation. Next. This was the graphic that we used for the key, which had the 5 priorities, where we had the vision of a safe Western Cape where everyone prospers. And then we had the 3 vision-inspired priorities wrapped around by safety, because it was understood that safety impacts on the economy, safety impacts on well-being, safety impacts on people and their daily lives. And so that was the wraparound in lighter blue that you see there. And then, of course, the enabler at the bottom. It's just really a graphic presentation of how we proceeded. Next. And this is how they relate to each other. So I mentioned just now that we went towards 3 priorities. So VIPs 2 and 4 went into growth for jobs, and VIPs 1 and 4 were coalesced into safety. VIPs 3 and 4 coalesced into well-being, and then the VIP 5 became the enabler. That's just to translate the PSP into the recovery plan broader priorities. Next. So what we want to do is provide you with an overview of the program, services, and interventions included in the priorities. Once again, we were requested to indicate what the priorities are and how they align. Okay, so we are not going to be touching on the performance per se. We will be saying what the interventions are about. And each of us will be taking you through a different section. Next. So I'll be taking you through the jobs priority. And first, I just want to talk about the quarterly real GDP growth rate. This only goes up until the end of December, but you can see there how we've really struggled in COVID, -16, and then a big bounce back to 12.7%, and then down, up, down, of great concern to us, and really only now, as a country, emerging to the point where our GDP is roughly equal to what it was before COVID. Next. One of our biggest indicators is the quarterly unemployment rate, and you can see the tremendous up and down here. In quarter 2021, it was at 23.7%. It went up to a high in quarter 4 of 28%, extremely concerning. Look, anything over 5%, quite frankly, anywhere in the world is considered to be concerning. So we're just overall concerned about anything that is close to the numbers that what we're seeing, but we are seeing at times an improvement and at times a deterioration. Again, up until the end of December, it has gone from that high in 2021 down to 22.5% in quarter 4 of 2022. Next. So we have a growth for jobs strategy now. It has priority focus areas, and those 7 priority focus areas have been identified for short and medium term based initiatives to horizontally enable the economy, to address the binding constraints and the most pressing issues, and to reach the growth for jobs goals and vision. And I think one of the questions that would be asked, and I think this is something that the Department of Economic Development and the Minister of Economic Opportunities could speak far more eloquently to, if you were to ask the question, what is really the difference between how the previous jobs priority relates to the growth for jobs strategy? I would say that the strategy does not pick winners, which sometimes previous strategies have done, said this sector of the economy and that sector of the economy, we're going to back them completely, but rather looks at all the foundational underpinnings of an economy. How do you grow exports overall? How do you address the binding constraints such as shortage of energy and shortage of water? How do you promote technology and innovation in a way that really bolsters the economy? So this is where we're at right now, but as indicated, a far more detailed presentation could be given by the Department of Economic Development and the Minister of Economic Opportunities. Next. I'm going to take you now through some of the very specific initiatives that are currently taking place within the job space. So under infrastructure development, we have road construction and road maintenance projects. We now call it DOI. So we used to have the Department of Transport and Public Works. We now call it the Department of Infrastructure. It includes the previous Department of Human Settlements. And this is quite key to the economy. We have public infrastructure maintenance and upgrade projects, again, DOI, new public infrastructure projects, a capital expenditure framework support program in environmental affairs and development planning, human settlements projects, and then the SIDAF, the Sustainable Infrastructure Development and Financing Facility. In terms of driving growth and opportunities, we have the Atlantis Special Economic Zone, Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone, that are critical entities for facilitating economic growth. Westgrow, we would know very well. Then we have an SMME booster fund. We have agricultural SMMEs that are being supported through a food security project. On trade and tourism, we have trade and export support to agribusinesses, Westgrow trade promotion, and tourism promotion. And then last on this slide, ease of doing business, also known as sort of red tape reduction, and support to government reform interventions. This is really about how we want to create an environment for business that enables them to flourish instead of bogging them down in bureaucracy. Next slide. Sorry, there's one on the right, absolutely critical, energy and resource resilience. So we have green economy ecosystem support to diversify our energy supply. And within that is a whole cluster of projects. We have the Municipal Energy Resilience Initiative. We are supporting municipalities to increase the uptake of small-scale embedded generation. We've got a wheeling policy, tariff support, and so forth. Also looking at water security interventions and then ecological infrastructure restoration, which is focused mainly really on invasive alien management. Next slide. Further on this, we have a lot of public sector job creation support. The EPWP work opportunities are really critical to providing some skills development, but primarily some income to people who are unemployed. And I think it's been an invaluable lifeline. And this is across departments. So while the custodian is Department of Infrastructure, in fact, every line department has some sort of EPWP work opportunities. And then jobs being facilitated through trade and investment program, again, Westgrow, Atlantis, and Saldanha Bay, special economic zones. On the issue of skills development and employability, we've got economic skills and work placements program, that's INDEEDAT. We have agricultural skills development, which is in agriculture. We have internship opportunities also in agriculture. And then we have agricultural bursaries in addition to that. Next slide. For the safety priority, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Gwen Derrymaker. And Gwen, if you can also put on your camera, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So this slide gives us an overview of the extent of the problem. As we know, we have extremely high levels of interpersonal violence in the country and in the province, and that's reflected as a tip of the iceberg by extremely high levels of homicides. Both the numbers and the homicide rates are high, although we have seen a stabilization since 2017, 2018, and in recent quarters, a trend in the Western Cape that is quite different from the trend in other provinces, which is quite encouraging. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the strategic approach that we've chosen for the safety priority, We've really built on international and local evidence of what works to reduce violence and crime. And so on the one hand, we have three focus areas in terms of what we deliver, which is improving law enforcement effectiveness and coordination, strengthening social protective factors against violence, which speaks more to social interventions to reduce violence in homes and families, in communities, and then improving safety infrastructure in public spaces. And that's the way in which we design our public spaces for safety. But then very importantly, we don't only focus on the what, we only focus on the how. And this has been something introduced specifically after COVID and using a lot of our COVID-19 lessons, or those have been strengthened. So firstly, we're using a coordinated approach by coordinating local resources through an area-based approach. And then we're using evidence to redesign programs, learn from what exists, what has existed elsewhere, what we know works, and then constantly assessing whether what we are doing is working or not. And then using data. And we have a lot of data from our Department of Health, from our Department of Mobility, our Department of Community Safety, but also exploring partnerships with other spheres of government to have a rich picture of the data that can inform and prioritize our interventions and track trends. Thank you, Sarah. So that's the overall approach. Next slide, please. So this is the detail of the different interventions that form part of the safety priority in the PSIP. First, in the law enforcement, we have three components: increasing and improving law enforcement capacity in our hotspots of violence, and we do that through LEAP deployment, rural safety units and canine units, school resource officers deployed by the Department of Education, our highway patrol and interception unit under the Department of Mobility, the neighborhood watches and rural safety structures, which are supported by the Department of Agriculture. Obviously, as a province, we have a key role to strengthen provincial oversight, and that we largely do through the process of determining and communicating our policing needs and priorities. And then lastly, our law enforcement operations are prioritizing drivers of crime, firearms, alcohol, and then in terms of the work of provincial traffic on habitual road offenders. And we do that through, so there we use tech and data to facilitate that work, and that's through the Integrated Transport Hub, which sits under the Mobility Department, and then the safety dashboards, which are managed by our Department of Health and Wellness and are made available to all law enforcement agencies in the Western Cape. So not only our own, but also SAPS and the City of Cape Town. Under urban design, our goal is to improve the design of public spaces to increase the feeling of safety, and that we do through our RCEP program managed by the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning, and which focuses on strengthening safety, dignity, and spatial transformation in a number of Western Cape towns outside of the metro. We're also putting up high perimeter fencing around schools in high priority areas to protect our learners and our school infrastructure from crime and from abuse. We are upgrading informal settlements in PHDA, which are also ABT areas, by the Department of Infrastructure. And then our Department of Local Government conducts a number of risk and vulnerability assessments in a number of areas outside of the metro. Next slide, please. Under our violence prevention focus area, we have 4 main focus areas, and those have been really identified by international evidence of what works to reduce violence, combined with what is most in the control of the province. And so our life course approach to reducing violence focuses on strengthening parent-child relationships. We do a lot of work in strengthening the quality of parenting programs by taking an evidence-based approach. We're strengthening or aiming to strengthen the resilience and emotional intelligence of our children at risk of violence, and that's through our Chrysalis Academy program. We have increased youth at risk support through our after-school programs, children at risk of dropping out of school. We have a school-based violence reduction program that is evidence-backed. And then we have a number of children who are assessed to be at risk and then referred to targeted support interventions through DSD. In terms of decreasing alcohol and harmful alcohol and drug consumption, we're exploring evidence-backed alcohol harms reduction legislative amendments, and that's through the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety. And then our Department of Social Development provides support to substance users through a number of substance abuse treatment programs. A very important driver of violence is GBV, but also harmful social norms and practices on violence. And one of the interventions tracked here is the psychosocial support provided to victims of GBV, and Tristan will speak again to GBV. And then we have two overarching interventions that form part of our violence prevention basket of services. And the first one is area-based teams that are coordinated through the Violence Prevention Unit in the Department of Health, which is being, its establishment is being finalized. And then lastly, through additional budgetary allocations last year, the Department of Social Development has hired a number of new social service professionals, both social workers, social auxiliary workers, and the majority of them have been deployed in our hotspots of violence. So again, trying to take a holistic approach to areas in most need. Thank you. That's it from me. I'll hand over to Tristan.
Okay. It falls to me to take you through the last priority. If we can just go to the next slide there. When we're talking about well-being, we're obviously talking about a range of factors in people's lives, and so it's difficult to find a single measure that'll give you a sense of how things are going. But I think the Human Development Index is internationally recognized as one of the best proxies for telling a sweeping story about the core elements of people's lives being on track. And as you can see, the story that this graph tells is that we have a slow but steady improvement in the HDI in the province over the last number of years. And I think it's easy to be lackadaisical about how slow and steady the curve is. But I think if you think about that against the backdrop of various other issues that we've been wrestling with over the same period in the economy, in our safety situation, the fact that we've consistently improved along the matrices around health, education, and general income, it tells a very positive story, I think, against some very strong headwinds over this period. If we go to the next slide. The conceptual logic of the well-being priority is to follow a life course approach, which again is informed by international best practice. And what it really means is we try and think across the whole period of somebody's life and make sure that we're providing the maximum number of opportunities for them to really live a full meaningful life. So if we go to the next slide. So the first part of the well-being priority focuses on strong foundations. And as you can see, the first 1,000 days is the first element of that. And that's really making sure that mothers and children are supported in the first 2 years of life to really be to get the best possible care and best possible developmental start that's available to them, and there are a range of interventions led by the Department of Health, but very often supported by other departments. And then that moves into the early childhood development phase. The first 1,000 days takes you up to 2 years old. And there you can see the interventions around ensuring that grade 1 learners are receiving some preparation in grade R to enter school, that there's specialized support services being provided for ECDs, and that after school care facilities are registered through DSD. Then the next part of the, no, can we just go back one? The next is about increased youth well-being, a focus on youth as they start to enter the school system, and you can see there's a particular emphasis on retention and improving the learning environment in schools. So we're looking at improving reading for meaning, improving maths outcomes, and ultimately a general retention rate, keeping kids in school and learning. And part of that is supported by a focus on a range of social, psychological support in schools through our Growth Mindsets program and a program that's specifically targeting violence reduction through socio-emotional learning. So now we can go on to the next one. Then the next part of the life course takes us into providing the social glue that people really need, or at least supporting the social glue that people need to form communities, to make sure the communities support both young people and as they emerge into later life. And the focus there is on our after schools programs provided by DCAS, the range of opportunities for recreation and learning through our sports, recreation, and arts programs, and our in-service learning opportunities. And then also a range of very important interventions around youth skills development, free internet access, and the Tutsong centers. And then also making sure that our services wrap around and support people, particularly vulnerable people, throughout their lives. There's a focus on improving health outcomes with a particular emphasis on HIV reducing HIV rates in youth, tracking TB patients to make sure they stay on treatment, making sure that families and communities have access to food gardens to improve their food security, making sure that basic services are made available, and ultimately that support for the most vulnerable in society is provided through meals, through the community nutrition development centers, supported by DSD, and beds for homeless adults in shelters. So that takes us to the end of this one.
Thanks, Tristan and Gwen. So, Chairperson, that takes us to the end of our presentation, and we're happy to field questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fast, Mrs. Fast. I'm going to take questions from the members now. I understand, Member Dugmore, that hand was up for the whole of the presentation. Was that a legacy hand, or would you like to begin the questions?
Chair, thanks. Yes, it was a legacy hand. I was just battling to get it down, but I do have some questions. But you know, whether you want me to start or someone else, I don't mind. But I would like to engage. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask that Member Bartman asks a question first, and then you, sir. And then I see Member Pretorius is also struggling with his hand function. But then I will have Member Pretorius. So Member Bartman, Dugmore, and Pretorius in that order. Member Bartman.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to find out, how do the respective departments liaise with one another in cooperation on the respective strategies on the particular topics. I do know that some strategies are cross departments, so in order to avoid working in isolation, if there's some sort of strategic approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Bartman. Member Dugmore?
Okay, sorry, Chair, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, sir.
Okay. No, first of all, thanks to the department for the presentation. You know, my understanding is that, you know, obviously the Department of the Premier is playing a coordination role in regard to this particular strategy, and then the projects which go along with it. But it's often said that, you know, if you can't actually count it, it doesn't exist. So the first thing I wanted to ask is in regard to the various projects which are obviously run by different line departments. I mean, are there actually more detailed plans which talk about numbers, geographic areas where these projects are happening, impact assessment? So you know, that was one of the concerns we had with the safety plan, that there was a broad plan, but we did not see any specific project planning which took it down to geographic area, numbers of people impacted upon, etc. And then just in regard to the three issues, I mean, the jobs issue, I think everyone agrees that that's a priority, but what always concerns me is that there's once again no reference to the issue of ownership of business by historically disadvantaged individuals, and the issue of assets and assets inequality. So yeah, you have a strategy which is talking to the creation of jobs, and that in principle is obviously something that we all support. But my question is, if one wants to link the jobs with the broader well-being, the issue of inclusive ownership of the economy, the issue of assets, the fact that in our province, 70% of all urban land is owned by South Africans who have been classified as white, and you know, those figures are available in terms of the historically colored and Indian and African community. So for me, I think I would like a response. Why does the economic growth not talk about ownership, changing ownership patterns, and then the issue of asset-based wealth? Because I think that, you know, if one only focuses on one, for me, the notion of inclusive growth is not only about jobs, but it's also about ownership. Then on the agricultural sector, I know that the presentation said that there are, you know, it's not like there's winning sectors that are being chosen, but the reality is that all the evidence shows that the potential for employment, specifically in the agricultural sector, is a big one. So what I wanted to ask in that particular sector, you know, what are the actual strategies to grow jobs in the different sectors of the agricultural economy? On public employment, there's literally only a reference to EPWP, which are nationally driven programs. And this is an issue we've often raised, Chair, that the presidential program of school assistance and so on. But I would like to ask the Department of the Premier, besides those national allocations, what is actually the budget spend planned in this financial year on provincial revenue invested into public employment by the province, not those EPWP programs? And then the last one on safety. I mean, those presentations are noted, but I think we would all agree that one of the most critical issues impacting on well-being in our province is the incredibly high levels of extortion, which are actually making safety, mobility, even moving around in many of our communities a very difficult thing. Not only just extortion of South African and foreign national-owned businesses, but actual households who are now paying, in many areas, protection money. And that strategy is totally silent on that. Now, I also understand and support, the broader approach to sort of change indicators, and the link to stats and health and the health strategies. But gangs, substance abuse, we still have a situation where the alcohol harms reduction has not moved. There's no formal amendment on the table in regard to that bill, and surely alcohol harms reduction should be a very central part of the strategy. So why is there no mention of that? Those are the questions for now. I don't know if we'll have time for a second bite, but those are the things that concern me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Dugmore. Member Pretorius, would you like to ask your questions?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, Chair, thanks to everybody for a very informative and enlightening presentation. It's a highlight on this Friday. Chair, I would like to refer to the slide that spoke to jobs, and then specifically the role of WESGRO, specialized economic zones, and specialized industrial zones. And I would just like to know whether in the medium to long term, an institution like WESGRO, for instance, would broaden its footprint. I don't know whether WESGRO's operations are based on local circumstances and conditions, and whether it's only aimed at the specialized industrial zones or economic zones or the metro. And then as far as the zones, so to speak, combined are concerned, what are the requirements for an area to be zoned, so to speak? If I could just get some guidance on that, please. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Fast. Thank you, Member Pretorius. Ms. Fast, if you could answer those questions in this time, please.
Sure, I'll do my best to answer, and my colleagues are a backup, so I'm going to ask any of my colleagues who want to add to what I'm saying to please put their hands up as I'm speaking. So I'm first going to come to Honourable Member Bartman's question about how departments liaise on strategies across departments. I think we've put a huge amount of effort into transversal strategies, and the way in which we've done so is that each one of the priorities has a governance mechanism. So as an example, in well-being, which is led by Minister Fernandez, includes Department of Social Development, Department of Cultural Affairs and Sport, Department of Education, and Department of Health. And they all work together, and when they have their meetings, they talk about transversal strategies. So some of the safety strategies that Gwen spoke to, it's like a classic example is that in order to address the safety strategy, you don't just have Department of Community or the Provincial Oversight and Community Safety Department involved. You've got Department of Social Development that is being asked to deploy more social workers to certain areas that are more high crime to address some of the social causes of that crime. So that's just one example of how you have a safety strategy, but you've got Department of Social Development involved, and you also have Department of Health involved, deeply involved in the safety strategy. So I think that through the actual governing mechanisms being transversal, when they meet together, they talk about the transversality of it. So I would say that just about every initiative, most initiatives we have in the province, large initiatives are in fact transversal in nature and have numerous departments involved as partners. Another example, for example, would be food security and nutrition security, where it's across all departments. So I think there's a lot of interdepartmental liaison on transversal strategies. With respect to Honourable Dugmore's questions, where can you find the more detailed spatial plans? You would be able to find that. I mean, the understanding is that all of the things that we're talking about now are reflected in annual performance plans, and they're reported in annual reports. And then where further detail is needed, the respective standing committees would speak to some of the detail in those and often get very detailed reports. So there isn't one place where you're going to find all of that apart from in the annual performance plans and annual reports. And you would know that if you put them all, stack them all up, they would reach that high together. So quite a comprehensive reporting that happens through the annual reporting process. With respect to the the jobs growth for jobs strategy, and the strategy not referring to ownership of assets and lack of inclusiveness. Therefore, I think firstly, I think that the relevant minister and department would be able to speak far more comprehensively and eloquently to this than I could. I would just indicate that we have included now the Department of Education centrally in the jobs priority, because at the very base of it, if we want to increase opportunities and increase wealth, then we're going to have to focus on producing scholars out of our education system that will be empowered to fully participate inclusively in society. Also, there would be our procurement policy, preferential procurement policy, and how it's implemented, which I think is ventilated on a regular basis and discussed in various standing committees. With respect to the sectors, it's not that we're neglecting sectors, and in fact, I think agriculture receives quite a bit of attention. It's that, you know, if you look at agriculture, what's holding back agriculture the most right now? In fact, it is a lack of energy, and it's a lack of water. So if you really want to drive exports, if you're not addressing that, you're not going to succeed. The other major binding constraint when it comes to agriculture is, in fact, the movement of fresh goods out of our port of Cape Town. So for that reason, in order to support agriculture, we're not saying, oh, agriculture, how can we support you? As much as saying, what are the things that are holding you back? It's the port of Cape Town. It's a lack of energy. It's a lack of water, and so forth. Also, the question was asked by Member Dugmore with respect to what are some of the programs they have. Extensive support to small-scale farmers. They have extension officers providing a lot of support. They have numerous bursary and other programs, and you know, that Department of Agriculture could speak to. With respect to the public works programs, I think sometimes there's a misconception that because these programs are national, the money is coming from national. But in fact, National Department of Public Works does not provide funding to provinces for public works jobs. What is expected is that every department, in the manner in which it conducts its business, should have programs, public works programs. There are occasionally programs such as the YES program, youth program, which are nationally driven and they are nationally funded. But most of the EPWP programs that are in provincial departments are in fact funded internally. So there is a mixture of these jobs. Also, we have initiated a number of programs in the province that create jobs for youth. And a perfect example is our Year Beyond project. We also have many young people who are employed in our after-school centers. So these are all provincial initiated programs that have a public works element to them. So this is not something where we receive money from above from national and roll out public works programs. We are very actively designing and rolling out our own programs, and we're also rolling out national programs with our own money. Then I'm going to leave the question on extortion and alcohol harms to Gwen to answer that one. Then Member Pretorius asked the question with respect to Wesco, would it broaden its footprint? It actually has quite a broad footprint, and it has something to do with the two SEZs, which is Atlantis and Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone. But in fact, so much of what they do is to facilitate inward investment from global players, and then to support, to work with the local players to be able to meet that particular demand. So in fact, I think it's a very broad. They have many trade missions that they send out every year to drum up as much investment and to increase our exports as much as possible. So Wesco certainly has a footprint across the province and globally in terms of what it's seeking to do. Then the question was asked, and Honourable Member Pretorius, I'm not sure if I'm going to answer this adequately, about whether requirements for it to be zoned. There are some really stringent criteria, and they has to meet the national criteria. and then it has to be approved by national, and national has committees which go in detail through this. So we've often had, this happened to me on a number of occasions when I travel to outlying areas, and a town will come up to you and say, we want our town to have a special economic zone. And we say, well, you're welcome to put through an application, but this application is actually processed. Ultimately, we would help you process it, but it's processed at a national level. And if you don't meet those criteria, and generally speaking, there's one economic zone per province. We're fortunate to have two. But it is really a national program with very stringent criteria in order to support it, because there's a very limited pot of national money that can support this. I'm just going to check through if any of my colleagues want to add. I don't see their hands up, so I'm going to hand over to Gwen to just speak a little bit to some of the work that's being done between province and SAPS around extortion. Over to you, Gwen.
Thank you, Hildegard. So, Honourable Doug Moore, thank you for those two questions. On alcohol harms reduction, it was in the slides. It is one of the key initiatives that forms part of our strategic approach. And then in terms of the legislative amendments, the public consultation process as part of the regulatory impact assessment has either started or is about to start. And so that process is following its journey. In terms of extortion, absolutely, it has become a massive risk and a massive safety challenge. In terms of the province, it's really a space that we can influence, that we cannot control. And so the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety and the Department of Mobility are both working very closely with SAPS in terms of supporting SAPS to address that problem. And it's taken through a number of prof joins, and one of them being the prof joins on gangs, or on the anti-gang strategy. Hildegard, that's it from me. Thank you.
Great. Chairperson, back over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to allow a second round of questions if necessary. I've just got two questions myself, and they're very quick ones. The first question is regarding exports. What is the collaboration like between the City of Cape Town and the other municipalities in the province with regards to trade promotion through Westgrow? I'm looking at something like, I know it could be described as agribusinesses, but for example, Langeberg and Ashton Tiger brands, and the salvaging of that company in the Ashton area. How is that collaboration happened in order to foster exports other than agribusinesses? And then in terms of well-being, I see on slide number 17 or 8, sorry, slide number 18, where you talk about after-school programs, and you also talk about, sorry, slide number 23. I talk about free internet access in public libraries. There's no mention of the Cape Access Centres, and how is the Cape Access Centres helping to build social cohesion and well-being in that space? Thank you. I'm just going to check to see if there are any other hands. No, there are no other hands. So if you could answer those two questions, please. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Chairperson. So, with respect to exports, Westgrow would facilitate the exports, but if there's a particular business challenge that is being experienced, for example, in Ashton, whether there's business distress or whether or not they are experiencing problems exporting through the Port of Cape Town, that would happen to the Department of Economic Development rather than with the city per se. I think the city focuses very much within its own borders. There is often a sort of an information sharing across those boundaries, but I think that the example you gave, where there would be some distress, business distress, I think economic development would be the most actively involved in that. And well spotted, Chairperson. The Cape Access Centres are alive and kicking and doing a tremendous job, and I think that they are really important with respect to facilitating inclusionary access to the internet, and that is really so critical for especially students who don't have the means to pay for data. So yes, that we are very actively pursuing that. Thank you. And in fact, I know that Mr. Arnse, as the acting DG, is on the line. So I think he's a passionate advocate on this. So perhaps, Hilton, you could speak to Cape Access Centres?
Chair, I know that you and Member Bartman and Member Dartmoor have been to many of these Cape Access Centres, so I do not think there's much more that I can add to the narrative of the Cape Access Centres and the value it can add. But as Hildegard has indicated, you're quite right, we should add it into the specific slide. And one of the initiatives that we included in the specific social cohesion and meeting the basic needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnse. I don't see any other hands or requests for questions. So, Mr. Arnse, would you like any closing remarks?
Sure, Chairperson. From our side, I just need to thank the committee for calling us and for taking interest in this very important piece of work that we're doing. And it's quite important, not only for this department, but for the province as a whole, and not only Western Cape government, but the province, everybody within the province. It's such a critical piece of work that the team is doing. And I just need to thank Hildegard and leading the team through this process, Chairperson, and also the presentation of this today and the team preparing and doing a very good presentation to you and the members. So thanks so much. And then also to the members for the questions that they're asking, that helps us to improve the quality of the product that we've put on the table.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnse and Ms. Voss, for that very thorough presentation. We really appreciate the time and effort that you put into it. And thank you very much for that. I will now give you a chance to leave the meeting and your excuse before we deal with the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairperson. Thanks, members. Thanks, Hildegard and team.
Thanks, and bye.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I will now open deliberations for the Western Cape Provincial Powers Bill of 2023. As I tabled it in the previous meeting, the Western Cape Powers Bill 2023 is intended to create a framework for the Western Cape to assert its existing constitutional and legislative and executive powers, and to seek the devolution or delegation of further powers from the national government. It is motivated by the recognition that in areas both within and outside the Western Cape's constitutional competence, the national government is unable or unwilling to act in the best interests of the residents of the Western Cape. The Western Cape Parliament and Provincial Executive have a constitutional obligation to act in the best interests of all its residents. They can only do so by identifying the areas in which the assertion of provincial powers is necessary, and by systematically taking all available legal steps to provide services to its residents. The goal of this bill is to create an overarching framework within which subject-specific provincial legislation, regulation, and policies, proposed national legislation, and requests for the delegation of national competencies will be considered. While this bill is primarily concerned with provincial powers and functions, it also recognizes that the Western Cape must work together with local government in the province. It therefore includes provisions to integrate the assertion and accumulation of the provincial powers within the role and powers of local government in the province. Section 2 sets out 5 objects of the Act. It is to identify and remedy failures of national government, to promote the assertion of existing provincial powers, to actively seek the assignment or delegation of additional powers, to mandate the Western Cape provincial government to prepare reports and draft bills to fulfill those objects, And finally, to create a mechanism for the Western Cape Parliament to introduce national legislation in the National Council of Provinces through its delegates. Section 3 identifies 5 areas where the province should assert existing powers or seek additional powers. They are policing, public transport, energy, trade, and harbours. Subsection 3 creates a substantive obligation of the Western Cape Provincial Government in all areas of provincial, local autonomy to promote provincial autonomy in all its actions and to seek the assignment or delegation of additional powers from national government. Section 4 obliges the Premier to table a report for each area of provincial and local autonomy within 6 months of the coming into force of the Act. Each report must identify the respective powers of the 3 spheres of government, address the ways in which national government has failed to govern effectively, list the additional powers of the province, include, if appropriate, draft provincial legislation, regulation, or policies, and, if appropriate, include draft national legislation that would delegate additional powers to the Western Cape. Section 5 establishes a standing committee made up of 10 members of the Western Cape Parliament called the Provincial Powers Committee. The committee's functions are to consider Section 4 reports, seek comment from all 3 spheres of government on those reports, invite and consider public comment, appoint its own experts to advise it on those reports, and having considered those reports, to recommend what steps the Western Cape Provincial Parliament should take in that area of provincial and local autonomy. Once the Premier has reported and the Provincial Powers Committee has made a recommendation, the Western Cape Provincial Parliament must act. This is dealt with in Section 6. It is afforded 3 months after receipt of the recommendation to adopt a resolution taking one or more of the following actions: approving the report, requiring the provincial government to supplement the report, directing the Provincial Powers Committee to introduce draft provincial legislation, directing its delegates to the National Council of Provinces to introduce draft national legislation, and recommending to the Assembly, the National Assembly, in terms of Section 104, subsection 5 of the Constitution, that it adopt or amend national legislation. And finally, any other resolution consistent with the objects of the bill. That is the bill that I've tabled before this committee in a previous meeting, and now we wish to deliberate on this committee. I will now ask the members if they have any input. Member Bartman.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, having read the bill with the 8 clauses, and it's actually 7 clauses because the last clause deals with the short title. And luckily, the bill is not long. It is only 6 pages, and quite frankly, with the preamble and the half a page at the end is actually 4 pages. I'm quite happy that the current bill deals with the alignment of the policy priorities of the province, as well as the alignment of the provincial strategic plan and provincial strategic implementation plan, which was actually also presented this afternoon in this committee. The bill also deals with many of the areas of competency that the Western Cape government and its executive have previously indicated there are obstacles to the province and to its residents, and that it would like to address. So in this light, I would like to support that we do move that this becomes a committee bill and that it is introduced as a committee bill. And further, that perhaps through you, Chairperson, that you just maybe ask the legal office to help the committee to create a memo for the bill, just so it's a little bit easy for people to understand the content of the various clauses. But otherwise, in terms of technicalities, I'm happy with the content. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Bartman. I see no further hands from the members on this bill. Therefore, I see the resolution that the Member Bartman has placed. Is there any seconder for the resolution? Member Pretorius?
I concur with what Member Bartman suggested and explained, and I support this bill, the tabling of it.
Thank you. Are there any members who wish to declare otherwise? In that case, thank you very much. In terms of Standing Rule 120, I will introduce the bill to the Speaker for tabling in the House, And I will, as Member Bartman has stated, I will also request legal services to assist in the memorandum that has to accompany the bill. That concludes deliberations on the Western Cape Provincial Powers Bill of 2023. I'd like to move on to the next item on our agenda. It's the consideration and adoption of the draft committee meeting minutes of 26 May 2023. Mr. Kutsia, if you could flight those, sorry, Mr. Kutsia, if you could flight those minutes for us, please.
There we go, Chair. Is it visible?
Yes, thank you, it is. If you could go down page 1, page 2, thank you very much. That's the end of the minutes. Can I have a mover to adopt the minutes?
Chair, can
Member
you see my
Bartman?
hand? I move to adopt.
Thank you very much. There is no need for the seconder, so the minutes are so adopted. Members, we now come to the part of resolutions or any actions. Are there any resolutions from the minutes, so from the members? Member Bartman?
Thank you, Chair. Just one resolution. I was quite surprised actually to find out by Dr. Fast in today's meeting that majority of the EPWP funding for the program comes from province, even though it's a national program. Are we able to just ask that maybe through the Premier department, or if it's not the Premier department, the relevant department then are able to give us those statistics of the funding then and the split of funding for the program? How much is by the province and how much is by national? Thanks.
Thank you, Member Bartman. I think that Mr. Kutsia, procedural officer, got that. Did you have that recorded, Mr. Kutsia?
Thank you, Chair. Got it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other resolutions? Member Pretorius?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I don't want to belabor something that I know apparently very little about, and I return to the Westgrow footprint. I'm very well aware of the footprint of Westgrow, and yet I very, very respectfully, I have yet to see projects being rolled out in the rural areas. I'm not talking about Atlantis, and I'm not obviously talking about the metro, but where I come from, George, I would like to see where Westgrow has actually been assisting in the implementation and rollout of projects. If that information is available, I would dearly love to see it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Pretorius. I'm sure Member Kutsia, Mr. Kutsia has captured that as well. If there are no further resolutions or actions, I would then like to thank the members for attending the meeting. Thank you very much again, once again, to the department. I look forward to the answers that we will get back from the resolutions and the actions. Have a wonderful Friday and be safe on the roads if you are traveling over the weekend. And we will see you at the next meeting. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, bye.